I guess in the last week, Trump has been making a couple of calls. He did have a good call with, he said, he described the call with Putin as very good. Um, Something in that light. Also, I think he had another call with Zelensky, and the call was also described as good. They had a good conversation, and this is in the backdrop with all the public display, as we said earlier, between Trump and Zelensky in the White House. I think Zelensky sounded more apologetic in the last call and was more open to working with the U.S. Things that the U.S. is the only outlet to peace right now. It seems like Putin is also on board on certain things. There's been negotiations in Russia, not in Russia, in Saudi Arabia. So the teams have been meeting and they've been having conversations. So the conversation went up to a level where the president had to talk with Putin. So it sounds promising. They've all said positive things about the talks. So it's our hope that the ceasefire might be around the corner. Um, but we don't know the details of this conversation. We just know how they describe it. Everybody involved had positive things to say. I think Zelensky doesn't have any power. The conversation is really between Trump and Putin, in my opinion, if you ask me. So that's basically a summary. And then we found the video yet.
Yeah, but again, just to add, so the conversation with Trump and Putin, they had a couple of things. They talked about a couple of things. Of course, they talked about a 30-day ceasefire. Trump wanted a full unconditional ceasefire. Putin was of the idea. I mean, it's a good idea. A ceasefire is a good idea, though. But he had his own worries as to how it would be, how it would be implemented, how it would be managed, who's going to ensure that the ceasefire is respected, or if it's violated, who's going to enforce it, right? So, the kind of issues that Putin also needed some clarification on. Yeah. So basic agreement for Putin was that there was going to be no attack on energy infrastructures. So no attacks on energy infrastructures. Again, those ones are easier to manage. If you shoot out a rocket and you burn, I don't know, a refinery or an electric power station, it's obvious. People can see that, right? And it's easy to know who did that. Trump did indicate that the phone call was quite long. So he said about a 2-hour phone call. Which meant that it wasn't, they didn't just talk about the ceasefire and ended at that. I'm sure they had a lot of other conversations.
To talk about.
There are bilateral relationships between Russia and the US, economic cooperation, and they also did talk about an international hockey match, which Russia is a big nation. They do enjoy hockey, the United States as well. So it's kind of this kind of sport diplomacy. Let's do something small that everyone can kind of relate to, and start rebuilding a relationship from there. So for Trump, it wasn't just about Ukraine. It was more about how do we work with Russia to resolve other issues, because again, Russia and the United States have a kind of common interest. A lot. Terrorism, for example, is something that is not only limited to the United States or Russia. Russia and the US and other powers could definitely work together to deal with this terrorism. The Middle East, the fighting in the Middle East as well is something that Russia and the United States can kind of work together to kind of resolve, right? And then it was, according to Trump, an interesting conversation. I would run the clip.
Readout of your call with Vladimir Putin, and it was a fairly optimistic take. Vladimir Putin agreed to a ceasefire immediately on energy and infrastructure, but not to a 30-day ceasefire. Tell us what happened.
Well, you have a situation where you have a lot of guns pointing at each other foolishly, because it would have never happened if I were president. That was not a war that was supposed to happen. And it did happen, so that's where we are. And right now, you have a lot of guns pointing at each other, and a ceasefire without going a little bit further would have been tough. Russia has the advantage, as you know. They have encircled about 2,500 soldiers. They are nicely encircled, and that's not good. And we want to get it over with. Look, we're doing this. There are no Americans involved. There could be if you end up in World War III over this, which is so ridiculous. But, you know, strange things happen. And I think we had a great call. It lasted almost 2 hours. Talked about a lot of things and toward getting it to peace. And we talked about other things also.
Was there non-negotiables mentioned by Putin? It was reported that I think the Kremlin media actually stated that he demanded an immediate cessation of aid to Ukraine in order to get to this multi-step deal.
No, he didn't. We didn't talk about aid. Actually, we didn't talk about aid at all. We talked about a lot of things, but aid was never discussed.
In the readout, it also stated that both sides want to get to an improved bilateral relationship, the United States and Russia.
That's true.
How can we trust that Vladimir Putin actually wants that, in that he's not also being influenced at the same time by his close friend, President Xi of China?
Thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I'm happy Trump sounded optimistic, like we described earlier. Also, a lot of things came out from Russia that were quite optimistic too. Trump is still on the same kind of like rhetoric he was on prior to the election, that the war would have never happened if he were president. And should this ceasefire come to fruition, man, will the man be vindicated? And what a victory that will be for America and the world at large, you know. Because for 3 years, this war has been ongoing, and we've had all kinds of negotiations. Many people have backed out, and it just tells you how strong Russia still is. I mean, Ukraine too is strong because of the support of Europe and US. But Russia has lost so many people, but that's still, I mean, the economy is not doing very good because of the war as well. But for to have jogged it this long, it speaks to Vladimir Putin's determination to see this through. Um, it's also interesting to hear that we're talking about peace between Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine is maybe an Eastern European country, but there's no mention of Europe here. Like Europe has been put to the sideline. I mean, Chuck clearly said in another interview that where have you guys been in the last 3 years? You have not been able to negotiate a peace deal. You know, so it's almost like the big boys are up now, and the big boys are trying to talk this out and sort it out. You know, with respect for each other, and knowing that each other has the potential to manipulate the conversation and drag it their own way. But then, I think everybody has seen a lot of bloodshed. Should we have a ceasefire, that would be a wonderful, wonderful victory for not just the Ukrainian people, but a war at large. For me, that's a Nobel Prize winning deal. Should Trump strike this? A lot of people have won Nobel Prizes for less. I don't want to call names, but should he go ahead?
No, call names. Why wouldn't you call names? Obama got a Nobel Peace Prize for
I
nothing.
think Obama got there for nothing.
nothing.
Like, he really got the Nobel Peace Prize.
They should take it
for
back.
being black. Yeah,
I would say they should take it back, because that is all. That's why he got it. He got a peace prize. No, for what? For what did he do?
What Obama did not do anything. Just because he was the first black president. And by the way, he's not black. His mother is white. So so yeah. If Trump can strike this deal, I think, and I'm not not that I have any influence, but I think that's a Nobel Peace Prize.
I definitely will contradict your Nobel. I don't think
any
sitting president should have a prize. You should get a Nobel Peace Prize at the end of your term, after we must have evaluated your look at the full picture and looked at your impact.
Right.
Well, Trump is fighting for peace with Russia, but at the same time he's supporting the fight in Palestine. No, in Palestine.
In Palestine, yeah. So in
the Gaza area, right?
In the Gaza area,
Israel has resumed bombardment of that piece, and again, Israel doesn't do anything unless they get a go ahead from Trump, right? So that too from the USA. So that too is happening. You can't be fighting for peace in one area of the world and then sponsoring and supporting war in another part of the world. It doesn't make sense. For me, even looking at Trump as the peace president, now it's becoming difficult for me to see because I get the feeling that like there is an agenda,
There is.
Trump needs to squash this beef with Russia so he could turn around and focus on China, because again, that is their biggest fight. They've
That's the
always
biggest
talked
one.
about China, but unfortunately, the fight with Russia took them way longer than expected. I know for sure that the plan was we use Ukraine as a proxy, we weaken Russia as much as we can, right?
Yeah.
And when Russia is weakened, the next country we turn to is China. That,
Yeah.
that is definitely the plan of action. Well, unfortunately, they got stuck. They've been stuck
Yeah.
with Russia for 3+ years, right?
More importantly, Russia has developed a strong relationship with China.
And more importantly, Russia has built a very solid relationship with China. So what
Yeah.
are they trying to do? We make peace with Russia, we pry them away from China.
Yeah.
China remains isolated, and then we can because again, none of these politicians ever thought they've never believed that Russia and China could resolve their differences to
Yeah.
the point where they could have this kind of relationship where one might even step in to support the other if they were attacked, right? People, China isn't sending weapons, technically isn't sending weapons to Russia. But again, they are buying Russian raw materials, Russian oil, Russian rare earth. And that is how Russia has the money to fight. Without China, without China's trade with Russia, Russia probably will not be able to keep going with this, right?
Through, yeah.
So America is like, we need to squash this beef so that we can divide these two people, and then we can turn to China. Because again, that's why
sorry.
Go ahead, sorry.
And with just my little research on how Ukraine is, it's like for sure Ukraine has to lose some land to Russia.
They don't have a choice. It's not an option.
And yeah, like I said, really the big boys are up and they're talking. Like Ukraine is like the third party now. You're just there to listen to two big boys talk, and then you follow through whatever agreement you have. Because it's Europe and Russia and America supporting Ukraine. Without that, Ukraine would have been decimated a long time ago.
Proxies don't have a say.
Yeah, they really don't have a say.
Proxies don't have a say. Ukraine cannot make. I mean, Ukraine is in a position where they cannot be dictating terms.
No.
Right? They can't.
They don't have that leverage.
They don't have the leverage. Russia can't.
Yeah.
Because they are not only doing well in the battlefield, they are. I mean, every day you hear them, they've taken territory, or you hear they've eliminated a good number of Ukrainian soldiers.
You heard Trump say they've circled soldiers, like 6,500.
You can either surrender or you die.
Or you die.
That is where you are, right? That is where we are now. I mean, I say these lightly, but no, this is really
it's sad.
Not lightly. This is a very serious situation where 2,500 soldiers are encircled, and the only option they get is you surrender, or you don't have. There's no wiggle room, right? So it's you do it or you die. And Trump has called Putin, I think, one extra time, just pleading on behalf of these guys. Say, just let them leave. Even though Russia has a different, Russia is like, you have to surrender. You are in, because these guys are in Russian territory.
Yeah.
In Russian territory, probably occupying Russian land, and you just want us to let them go? No. Yeah. We can't just let them go. They would either surrender and then we'll deal with them, prisoners of war, those who have committed any crimes against Russian civilians in the Kursk area. Of course, we would have to find a way to have you answer for the crimes that you've committed, right? That is Russia's position, not mine. It's not my position. That is what Russia is. That's what Russia is saying.
Yeah.
So definitely Trump as a peace president. Yeah. Well, there's
I agree with you, but I know. And the Israel Gaza one. Yeah. It's a separate issue, but I think on just one thing. Yeah.
But you can't again, if Nobel. That's why I say Obama needed his Nobel Peace Prize revoked because he was doing peace in one, and then he was also, he was bombarding Libya is what it is today. It stands to Obama.
Yeah.
Syria is what it is today. It stands to Obama, right? So you can't give somebody a peace prize for one thing after then he turns around and commits atrocities in other parts of the world and keeps his prize. No, he shouldn't. Yeah. So same thing for Trump. We can't talk about a peace prize now. He needs to prove it. He needs to prove it. Deal with.
For some reason in my mind, I can separate those two things. I can like, okay, the
You
war
can
in Russia.
how do you separate those two
Because
things?
the Ukraine, Russia is in one matter, and then Israel, Gaza is another matter. So,
I mean, it's people dying. You don't get a peace
you
prize
see
for
people
killing
dying. Yeah.
people in the Middle East and then saving people in Europe and get a peace prize. No, it's the same thing.
Right.
People are dying all over
Well,
the place.
people,
You are
but that's
providing
it.
Israel the bombs that is bombarding
That's yeah.
peasants, right? I mean, technically, you are still providing weapons to Ukraine. Technically speaking,
Technically,
Trump
yeah.
hasn't stopped providing weapons. You're providing weapons. You're providing intelligence.
Yeah.
And then you're making peace at the same time. How it make that make sense? Like people say, make that make it doesn't make any sense. But again, that's how I look at it. I mean,
Yeah, that's a
you
one.
have
Yeah.
your
Well,
opinions. I can challenge them,
I can.
but those are your opinions, of course.
Yeah, I can separate those two. Yeah, fair enough.
Okay. So this is what Putin had to say in response
Yeah,
to
interesting.
that.
Yeah.
Just
Let's listen to Putin.
agree.
So how are they going to use these 30 days? Are they going to use it in order to continue the forced mobilization in Ukraine, in order to supply weapons to those areas, in order to newly mobilized units to undergo training, or none of this is going to happen? Then we have a question. How are we going to resolve the issues of control or verification? How can we be guaranteed that none of this is going to happen in the future? How are we going to control this? I think on the level of common sense, everyone understands this. This is a very serious question. Who is going to give orders to ceasefire? And what is the value of these orders? Can you imagine about 2,000 kilometers? Who is going to determine who and where violated this agreement? That's an area of 2,000 kilometers. And then who is going to blame who? The violations of this agreement. All of these are questions that need to be thoroughly studied on both sides. So the idea in itself is correct and we support it, but there are questions that need to be discussed. And I think we need to discuss this with our American partners. Maybe we need to have a call with President Trump and discuss this. But the idea in itself to stop this conflict in a peaceful way, that's something that we support.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
Yeah, so all positive things from Putin. Obviously, he has questions, and without being an expert, I think his questions are legitimate. Who is going to control? Who's going to control 2,000 kilometer? How do you monitor who's violating or not? So all those are legitimate questions. I hope they can come up with access to this, and they can maintain the ceasefire, and they can have a long-lasting peace in that area. But I'm very optimistic with the way he sounded. He sounded like he's in for it, regardless of the questions he has. So hopefully, him and Trump can make it happen, and then Zelensky will not be an obstacle to. His, also in the last minute, the Ukrainians say, "Oh, don't agree to this and that." But yeah, hopefully they can figure something out, and they can be true peace in that region because it's been just drug out for so long. A lot of people have lost their lives there. It's sad to see. And you don't even need to go, you just need to go on social media, just go on Twitter and see all the videos of the devastation and people who are dying. It's sad. So, yeah, I guess we'll just, same thing too with Gaza, Israel. It's just sad. Yeah.
So we talked about compromises, and you did mention earlier that Ukraine would lose some territory. So far at this time, I think Russia occupies about 25% of Ukraine. Most of these parts of the territory are now considered Russian because they did they had they went through a process
The memorandum.
yeah,
Yeah.
of becoming Russian. So in the Russian
Mhm.
constitution now, these parts are full parts of Russia.
Russia. Yeah. Ukraine did not want
Do
to.
you think Ukraine is in a place where, again, like I said earlier, they can't dictate terms, but
Yeah.
do you think that they would easily accept compromise losing these parts of land?
Yeah. For the little research I've done and people that are listening to that expert on this topic, Ukraine just basically has to, because you have ethnic Russians living in this region,
Mhm.
and I think at one time they had voted to join Russia and they became part of the Russian territory, but Ukraine had, refused. That was the whole thing that happened back in 2014 with the
Yeah, that's
annexation
how
of
the fight
Crimea. So
started. Mhm.
that's really where it started. And I mean, you can even go back to the 90s. It's been a ongoing war starting from Bush senior, Clinton to Bush. All the negotiations that had been done back in the 90s with Vladimir Putin. Preventing the expansion of NATO. It was so. It's not a day's thing. And these people, they've been living with Russia, and many Ukrainians do speak Russian. They have intermarried, they live similar lives, and many of them in that region, from what I read and studied, consider themselves Russian
Mhm.
before the annexation. So it's a very complicated issue. But then I think for this piece, from what I've heard from the leaders speaking, Ukraine just has to lose that territory. Like they can have control and expect to have peace. It's sad, but whatever needs to be done to have peace is, yeah, I'll be happy to see that happen.
I think the longer Ukraine tries to push this back, the
Lives
more
and
parts of
much,
their
yeah,
country they lose.
yeah,
Because if they had, again, if they had negotiated from the very beginning, Minsk one, it was
yeah,
not all the people wanted was, we need a little bit of autonomy. We would
yeah,
remain in Ukraine, but we
yeah.
want to recognize that we have a different background. We speak Russian. We affiliate a little bit more with the
The
Russians. Well, we
Russian,
might
yeah,
not we don't necessarily want to be part of Russia.
part of them,
We
yeah.
want to remain part of Ukraine, but we want to have a little bit of autonomy. We want to have Russia as our own national language in
Hmm.
our area, because again, that's the language that we speak, right?
Yeah,
There was a means too where it was reinforcement, autonomy for these people,
right,
and well, these agreements were never implemented. I mean,
right.
Europe stood as a guarantor for these agreements, but again,
Mhm.
Angela Merkel clearly stated, and Francois Hollande, they made it very clear these agreements were just a way to delay any eventual fighting with Russia, and to
Right.
supply, to get Ukraine to a place
Get
where
ready. Yeah.
they could be ready for war. So they took, I think it's 8 years. They took
Yeah.
about 8 years or more to
Yeah.
prepare Ukraine
Oh
for this
yeah.
fight. So so from the very beginning, this fight had to happen
Yeah.
because the Europeans and the Americans wanted it to happen. They
They do
found
want it to happen.
a puppet. They found a state that they could
Yeah.
use to challenge Russia. The state that was willing and open to sacrifice their people, for someone else's war. Because this
Yeah.
fight is not really about Ukraine. It's about
No.
more about Europe and the United States
And
and Russia,
and
and has
Russia. Yeah.
little
Yeah.
to do with Ukraine per se,
Right.
right? Ukraine didn't have to be part of NATO.
They did not have. I mean,
They
that
did
was
not have
part of
to
the
be.
agreement. That was a part of the agreement. And I think it goes as back as the Clinton, where
Yeah.
he said, "Oh, now the NATO and the US can expand their military base towards Ukraine." Well, they started expanding to other countries, and from what I've read, Russia was warning them, "You guys you're violating the treaty that we already have in place.
Mhm.
You keep expanding." They said no. They kept expanding, keep building military bases, keep going. I think that's what has happened in Georgia, the country of
That's
Georgia, the
yes.
country of Poland. and stuff. The Soviet Union was very big. So during its collapse now, Russia had to secede control from all these local
Of
areas.
course, of course. I mean,
So the Russians are still thinking in that light of the Soviet Union, and they've already lost a lot of the countries that were part of the Soviet Union. They want to stick to what they can stick to, according to the
just
limits.
just like the Americans have the Monroe Doctrine, right?
Yeah,
It's your sphere of influence. You are the largest military, the
exactly,
biggest country where you in
exactly.
your area. So
Yeah,
it's likely that you have control over some of the states around you. America does that
yeah.
all the time.
Now, imagine,
You
imagine building a
go to
military base
Latin
in
America.
Mexico. Yeah,
America has a lot of influence.
yeah.
Russia can't just move military bases to
This
Mexico.
is to
America probably
Mexico
wouldn't take
or
that lying down.
no, you won't take that now.
If you remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, it's
Yeah,
the same thing.
exactly.
America will not allow Soviet missiles docked and based in Cuba.
Yeah,
It makes sense.
it makes sense for Russia
It
to
makes
be as
sense.
as as
But
as, as a war power. Yeah,
what applies? What if it, what is good for
what
the
applies
goose
for the
is good
goose
for the
is not good
gander?
for the gander. Yeah,
For the gander, right? So
yeah.
it should happen the same in Russia. Russia
It's
is the biggest military power in that
that
post-Soviet
region.
era,
Yeah,
right? They have a sphere of influence. Well, you've taken
they do.
Poland, they don't care. Poland is fine. It's way on that side, right?
Yeah,
But not Georgia. They told you it can't
Georgia,
happen.
Estonia. Yeah,
It can't happen. It can't happen in Ukraine. But you wouldn't listen.
you won't
And this is
listen
where
and keep
we find
expanding.
ourselves because people keep pushing. We'll test and test and test and until war starts. And here
Yeah,
we are fighting wars and more than 1 million people
yeah.
dead. Right? More than 1 million
And we
people
also,
dead.
and this is also in the backdrop with they had Ukraine had a pro-Russia president who was toppled, to um, um, include to vote in this guy Zelensky now who's pro-Europe and pro-expansion of NATO. So I mean, Russia was pretty happy with the guy who was willing. I forgot his name. Who was willing to work with Russia, but
Mhm.
then he was toppled with some riot, and yeah, that also contributed heavily with Russia, like saying, "Oh, our influence, we're losing grip here. We need to use force."
And again, the same thing with China. China in Asia, China is the biggest, the
It's the biggest
biggest the biggest military power, the biggest
military economy.
economy.
Yeah.
So they are supposed to have a sphere of influence. You can't just again. I see the US and European
Mhm.
states, doing their thing with they tried it with Hong Kong and China. I mean China did what it did
Taiwan, Hong
and
Kong.
and
Yeah.
and now they are doing that with Taiwan. And again, if
Yeah.
Taiwan is not willing to learn from Georgia and Ukraine, well, they are definitely going to be
They're gonna
next.
end up in the
And
same.
just again, once the again, who knew that America would at one point say no? I think this has gone too far. We need to step back.
Yeah.
With Ukraine, who knew that? So now, once this happened, America would have caused Ukraine to lose 25% of their territory.
It's territory.
They
Yeah.
would have caused the devastation. They would have caused the death of more than 1 million Ukrainians. They caused the displacement of several millions of Ukrainians who
Yeah.
are either in Europe or in the US or in Canada or all over the world. That is America's doing. That is
That's
the doing of the European states.
yeah.
It's nothing to do with Ukraine, nothing to do with Ukraine, but all about America's show of strength and Europeans Europeans, they're just always following. They tag along and they go with the ride, right? They don't
Yeah.
oppose, they don't
Yeah.
challenge,
Yeah.
and that's all they do.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, just a little bit of that. So yeah, I'm happy, just like you said, to see that Russia did not just say no peace at all.
Yeah. They are
Right?
open to it. Yeah.
They are open to the idea of a ceasefire. They're open to the idea of peace. Now it's just figuring out how this peace is going
Yeah.
to play out, right? Who's going to do what? Again, it's very clear they don't want European soldiers in Ukraine.
Yeah.
To whether they are peacekeepers, no European soldiers there, no NATO related soldiers there. So it's finding out who is going to do the work. Right?
Yeah.
They don't want American soldiers there as well. So it would
No.
have to be some I don't know.
They have peace is
You
another
have to
option.
find ways to deal with that, right? Yeah. So again, things are changing pretty fast.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you know, world politics is moving in a pace these days that
Yeah.
is faster
It's hard to keep up.
than most people can keep up. So
Yeah.
by the time we get to a place where we can have a conversation, you know,
And then the next step,
things
something
have
else happens.
progressed.
Yeah.
So there's definitely more that has happened, which we haven't really talked about again, because we too need to keep up with
With
developments
everything that's happening.
and do a
Yeah.
research and have an understanding of what is going on in the world to come out and have a conversation, right? So yeah, by the time you hear this, yeah, there's definitely a lot more
There
that
might
has
be
happened.
updates. Yeah.